I'm the boomer here, but actually you're a 27-year-old dinosaur, aren't you? Aren't you, Nick Fuentes? All women,
I am.
all women are annoying. All women grow old. They all get fat. Says the guy. Have you ever had sex?
No, absolutely not.
Wow, says the guy who's never got laid.
I don't know, Piers. Maybe the Roman Catholic wants to remain celibate. I thought you might understand this, seeing as you yourself claim to be Catholic. Allow me to give you a quick refresher. In Hebrews 13:4, it says, "Let marriage be held in high honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled. For God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterous." Now, seeing as you're Catholic, we can get into it even a little bit more. In the Catechism of the Catholic Church, Section 2353, it says, "Fornication is cardinal union between an unmarried man and an unmarried woman. It is gravely contrary to the dignity of persons and of human sexuality." But it would seem at the ripe age of 60 years old, you still have to resort to playground high school insults.
Bring you in here. I mean, I just want to, before you say what you want to say, what he said after the interview, Nick Fuentes, was Piers Morgan tried his best, but his hardball interrogation made me look even better than Tucker's wildly criticised softball interview. The regime can acquiesce like Tucker, or it can try to resist like Piers, but the result is inevitably the same: total Groyper victory. Now, look, on one level, I admire his social media work, right? He goes on the attack, he gives it full bells, he claims total victory. It's very Trumpian, and it can work. It can be very effective, okay? And he's perfectly entitled to claim total victory and whatever, and I'm sure all his supporters agree. But it's interesting that he views me and Tucker Carlson and other people who now do our own shows or whatever as the regime. Almost like anybody who's older than him is part of some ancien regime that just doesn't get it. All his supporters called me boomer, right? And I was like, I've been called that probably ever. Okay, I'm a boomer. I don't really know what that means, but it just means I'm an old dude who doesn't get it, right? And it may be, as Glenn says, there is a more interesting conversation to be had about why these guys get so popular. And it may be that when I do my slightly old school journalistic trick, as somebody put it, of just being quite tough and rigorous with questioning, that it's viewed by young people who gravitate to people like these guys as just an old boomer going through the motions.
Being this out of touch boils down to pure laziness. When people talk about the regime, they're not talking about purely old media or even just the government. They mean a broad system of institutions, including, but not limited to, the mainstream media, large corporations, and academia. They believe that all of these institutions share the same assumptions, protect each other's interests, and shape what is considered acceptable opinion, regardless of who wins the election. Pierce would have known this definition had he taken 5 minutes to Google it, but I guess that's too much work. The idea of the regime is very similar to the libertarian concept of the cathedral, but it is a lot less plausible as an explanation. The cathedral relies on incentives, institutional norms, and human self-interest to explain why elites tend to align without explicit coordination. Fuentes' version, by contrast, leans heavily on emotionally charged language and implied intent, treating the same outcome as evidence of deliberate manipulation rather than emerging consensus. I want to clear something up as well. A lot of people think that consensus means correct. It does not. All it means is that the majority of people agree on that, right? The consensus can be very, very wrong because people are very, very easy to manipulate. I mean, look at Nick Fuentes. He has all of these people being tricked into being statists still while somehow hating the state. In this next clip, Piers fails the breakfast question in a sense and shows us how he cannot understand hypotheticals. Take a look.
I'm not sure what the net gain is. I don't know if you really got to know a better him, not because you didn't do a great job, you did do a great job, but because I'm not sure who the person is behind that persona. And the question I would ask you, Piers, is if you knew ahead of time that doing this interview would double the amount of people who believed in the worst things that he believes, would you still do the interview? If you knew ahead of time that it would double that
honestly
number,
don't think,
would you still do it?
Well, I don't think that is going to be a consequence of it, honestly. But what I do think...
So the whole point of this section of the show was for them to discuss whether or not it's worth bringing people like Nick Fuentes on the show because they don't want to expose him to a bigger audience, perhaps. So what I think his name is Mark Lamont Holt, I might be getting that wrong, what he said was basically if the effect of bringing Nick on the show would be Nick doubles his following, would Piers still do it? And instead of acknowledging that as a hypothetical, Piers just says, well, that would never happen. After this segment, Piers goes on to basically make the accusation that Nick Fuentes is using bots in order to bolster his following because the mainstream media reported on it. Now, he does say, I don't know if this is true, but he still brings it up.
Agreed. Well, what I can say with some certainty is that pretty well 100% of his groypers who've directly messaged me or members of my family have been highly abusive, overtly racist, very misogynist, and many of them anti-Semitic. I can say that with certainty. Now, what I don't know is how many of those are human beings and how many are from a bot farm. Because according to reports in the last 2 days, a lot of his stuff comes from bot farms. I don't know if that's true, but that's been reported in various mainstream papers.
I don't doubt it.
And I don't know how representative these ones on X or Instagram are of the total body of his support. I just don't know. So, I don't want to generalize and say all...
And neither do I, Piers.
I don't want to say all Nick Fuentes supporters are disgusting, because there may be a lot of people... It's a bit like Tommy Robinson.
And to be clear,
let me make my point.
I'm not saying that... To be clear, I'm not...
Let me finish my point.
Oh,
it's a bit like Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson in the UK, right, is a bit like Fuentes over here. And there's no doubt, as the people marching with him have grown bigger and bigger and bigger, the idea that they're all fascist, racist, whatever, is nonsense. A lot of people are marching for well-intentioned reasons connected with the immigration crisis in the UK. Right? He has bad people as well, and I think he's a malevolent character. But again, I wouldn't generalize anymore.
Now, I played that whole clip just to give credit to Piers because he does say he doesn't think all of Nick Fuentes fans are racist. Instead, he thinks they are more so misguided and basically being taken as what he called earlier in the interview to be a cult leader. I also wanted to play the whole thing because you can see he keeps interrupting Mark, and it's really weird. He does this the entire show, and Mark is really agreeing with most of what he's saying, but he's trying to challenge him a little bit more than the other people. So Piers keeps interrupting him. Now, I do want to say I don't doubt for a second that there are a lot of bots out there set up to support Nick Fuentes. However, I do not believe that they are set up by him himself. I would say probably set up by some of his fans, or even mostly probably people who don't like him, who want to make his fans out to be like raving lunatics.
Can I ask you a question, Pierce?
Yes, yeah, sure.
I would like to
But again,
dive into...
I didn't generalize.
Well, hang on, let Andrew come in. Let Andrew come in.
Okay.
There was a part of the interview where you were very combative and you said you haven't even been laid and you're a virgin. This guy's a Roman Catholic.
Right.
Isn't he supposed to be a virgin until he's married? Isn't that part of your guys' faith?
To be fair to him, that is. I was brought up a Catholic. I'm not a particularly devout Catholic. I disagree with a lot of the church's
But you
teachings.
do agree that Catholics are supposed to remain chaste until marriage, right?
The strict interpretation from the Catholic Church about that is you should be.
So how come he didn't get? Shouldn't he get credit for that?
Well, he couldn't.
The idea that he's kind of staying within the confines of his religious beliefs.
I have no problem, but he also...
Or he can't get any action.
But he also self-identifies as an incel, which is more problematic.
Here's what Mark just said. You see what I mean? Like, he can't get any action. The guy is rich as shit, and he's a good-looking guy. He could get action if he wanted it, Mark.
And by the way,
hang on, Mark.
I agree with you, Andrew. I'm just teasing.
Just let me finish your point.
I'm just teasing.
What I'm saying to you, though, is this: is that of course he could. The thing is, though, is that if you guys are saying like he's a huckster, he's a fraud, isn't he in fact following rigorously his faith by doing that?
Well, so my response to that, I think it's a really...
what he said in the interview.
Hang on, Harry. I think it's
yes,
a really...
it is what he said in the interview.
I want to respond to Andrew.
No, it's not.
I think it's a perfectly valid question, particularly as I have always said I'm a Catholic. I was raised a Catholic. I had spiritual guidance from Catholic nuns when I was 12 years old. I go to church occasionally. I'm not devout. I'm not there all the time. I don't agree with some of the Catholic Church's views and policies, and I wish they would evolve faster. However, as speaking Catholic to Catholic with him, yes, it's a perfectly valid thing that he could say, I am saving myself for marriage. But if that's all he said, fine. But I would argue that, if you look at him as a Christian, for example, how many of his other views are compatible with being a Christian? Right?
His view on the priesthood, for instance,
racism
was correct.
So in my opinion, where Harry and Piers mess up here is they're basically trying to say that in order to have any Christian values, he has to be a perfect Christian, and that all of his views have to be completely to the Bible, right? And if we're saying this, then Piers isn't a Christian either, right? Because Piers's views aren't all with the Bible. Piers even said that he doesn't agree with everything that the church says. So therefore, he wouldn't be a Catholic going by this definition. Now, Andrew, the guy in the top right, does mess up here as well, because he says that Nick said in the interview with Piers that he was saving himself for marriage because he is a Catholic, and that's not what Nick said. But I do find it very weird that Harry's trying to base everything off of this one interview and not off of the entire worldview. He's trying to basically cherry pick and only talk about this interview and not talk about things that Nick has said in the past, which I find to be very weird, because the whole time they're trying to talk about things that Nick have said in the past that are awful things that he said, but won't talk about the things that he's actually been morally consistent on. Another thing that they mess up on is they aren't really trying to contend with the logic. They're trying to contend with the person and basically be like, this person's awful and horrible. And while those things might be true, I personally believe that you should be contending with the logic of a person and not just saying, oh, this person's bad, therefore all their logic sucks. No, you need to actually try to understand what they're thinking, and you should never assume that you know what somebody's thinking more than they know. You should never assume you know more about a person than they know about themselves. I also want to mention that Harry is extremely unnatural on camera. He is very, very painfully aware of every little facial expression he's making. He's trying to basically virtue signal the entire interview with his facial expressions, and it's extremely, extremely obvious and very annoying because of how over the top they are. It just makes him look like a complete retard, if I'm being completely honest. Anyway, guys, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you hated the video, unsubscribe, drop a dislike. Tell me what I can do better in the comments, or if you just want to drop a hate comment, that's fine too. And I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.